This is James Arnold Taylor, voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Welcome to a more civilized podcast. This is the podcast you're looking for. You may not go about your business. Stay here, listen, and then move along.
Well, hey there, listeners. I'm Kyler.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Ross. I'm here.
As ever.
Yeah, sorry.
Ross, you got some news, I think.
I do. Some
jumping right in today.
Very newsy type news. So, first up, there was an article posted by IndieWire here recently talking about the usage of Leia in Episode 9.
I'm very intrigued by that.
Yes. Now, one thing that's interested me is that they're apparently using more stuff from Force Awakens and not so much from Last Jedi. Because JJ is directing this one, he's using a lot of the stuff that he filmed back in Episode 8. Or because you're dumb, stop it. Apparently what's happened is that there were a lot of scenes between Poe and Leia that didn't make the cut. Yeah. That they filmed and they did a lot of scenes together.
Which would explain why Poe basically didn't have any sort of character arc in the first one at all. Yeah. It was because they had to cut it all.
Basically. Yeah. And so they're actually going to be digging those up and cutting those in to the episode.
Which I'm excited to see.
They're probably still going to have to be doing some digital cutting on it because Leia would be in costume from Episode 8.
No,
7. Gosh dang it. Numbers. Because, I mean, she'd be in that, like, General Leia kind of pantsuit thing that she was wearing, which may or may not fit in Episode 9. Well, so they'll probably cut her head off and put it on.
I don't think so.
I
don't necessarily think so, because Episode 8 takes place over literally the course of a couple of hours, and Leia is in her dress and then in a hospital dress. Leia can't put on her general clothes again, you know?
But this is all coming from Episode 7. I mean, but again,
it's like... But that's what I'm saying, is it's not like Episode 8 said, she no longer wears a general's outfit. She's in dresses. Like.
But I mean, it's also not like this is a comic strip or something where everybody's wearing the same clothes all the time. Like, even Han Solo with his signature look, the clothes he's wearing in Episode 4 are not the same ones he's wearing in Episode 6. They just look similar.
Yeah.
And so I would wager that they would probably do that. That's one of the major things that makes me nervous about Episode 9, is just that cobbling together a storyline out of abandoned pieces of footage from other movies, that's just not best case storytelling scenario.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. I mean, I had that same thought in how do you kind of wrangle the story to kind of show that. But if it is strictly like character building between the two, maybe it'll work. I don't know. I trust JJ. I'm sure it'll be fine.
I don't distrust JJ. So.
And also, like, the retouching they could do to make her costume different is you could even just do like a color switch on that old costume. Yeah. You can do that in post, and that would probably be fine. So, next, there are rumors swirling that the trailer and the title for Episode 9 will be released during Star Wars Celebration, and on I believe it's the first day of Celebration, April 12th.
Yeah, Star Wars Celebration is happening in April, so then people are like, maybe this day.
Yeah. Well, and they've got to start soon. I mean, it's got to be happening. But also, someone made a good point in the article, was saying that there's going to be all these days of Star Wars Celebration for them to merchandise and hype up for Episode 9.
Speaking of Star Wars Celebration, just a little preview for what's coming down the line on this very podcast. We are going to do a Star Wars Celebration recap episode. We are going to watch what we can of panels and keep track of whatever important announcements are made or whatever, and I'm sure many of you are already going to see it, but then we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff here about Star Wars Celebration after it ends, the Wednesday after. So, stay tuned for that.
Yeah, mark your calendars. Be prepared for a Star Wars title, April 12th. Tonight, Chris educates us, Kyler is confused, and Ross nods in agreement. It just,
So, Chris, you're in charge, Professor.
Yes. All right. So, where this episode came from, if you've been on the internet, which you probably have because you're listening to us.
Yeah, if you're not listening to us on the internet, please tell me how.
They downloaded the episodes. It's all good.
From the internet.
From the internet. They've only ever been to our site. You've probably heard people talking about how Rey is a Mary Sue. It's one of those things that it's like I've been on the internet looking into where this came from, and I can't really identify whether or not this is like an actual widespread thing or if this was one of those, hey, 3 guys named Cooter got pissed about the Starbucks holiday cups, and then everybody else got pissed because someone was angry about that, but in reality, almost nobody is bothered by that at all.
I think it's probably like 1 or 2 notches above that.
Yeah, I would say that, but I have seen enough people that dislike the new movies that have complained about things very similar to this.
That's what I'm saying is I think for the most part people don't care, but based on my, granted, limited knowledge of what a Mary Sue is, in some ways I can see where there's the argument to be made, and I can understand why that might be unappealing to some people. Like, you want more compelling characters than just, oh, this is somebody who can do everything, right? That was, by the way, my understanding of what a Mary Sue is somebody who's good at everything, and that's kind of black and white.
That is an aspect of it, yes.
Yeah, that's exactly what you said last time. Well, that's part of it. And I was like, oh, okay, great. I'm about to be educated.
I've discussed this topic with one or two people, and they were all very much like, she's not a Mary Sue, that's so annoying. And I'm like, no, that's not what this episode is going to be about. This episode is not about how Rey is not a Mary Sue. She totally is, under many definitions of the word. This is an episode about how Luke is just as much of a Mary Sue as she is, and that's why it's not really a problem that she is.
I'm so excited.
So, let's start with, what is a Mary Sue? Mary Sue is one of those words that kind of had one definition and then expanded to others through misuse or exaggeration or just repeated use of the word.
You're saying the internet repeatedly misuses words?
You don't even need the internet. Like, antihero, this happened way before the internet became big. Irony's another one of those. Sociopath. It's like nobody's using that right.
Nazi. It's Godwin's law, right? On the internet.
Exactly.
Yeah, comparing somebody to Hitler, the longer the argument goes on, the higher the likelihood of that.
Inevitable, yep.
And it's so true. And they're almost never accurate.
Yeah, exactly.
As a historian, I'm always like, wait, did they murder 11 million people in concentration camps? Okay, then they're not Hitler. Let's rein it in a little bit.
Mary Sue is one of those terms where it started with one meaning, but it gradually grew beyond that. And, where like antihero is one of those where it started with one, now it has two, maybe more. The second one's very nebulous, and it's so broadly used inappropriately that we can no longer claim it only means what it originally meant. So an antihero,
you just mean a dark, gothy, edgy hero.
Exactly. And basically you have to distinguish, do I mean this by the classical definition, or do I mean the way everyone uses it today? Because it's used so often that way that we can't really argue that it doesn't mean that anymore. It just has two meanings.
Like a moot point in Jesse's Girl. So moot point now means a point not worth discussing. A moot point originally meant a point worth discussing. Oh, it literally, that's because he misused it in that song. One generation completely changed the meaning of the word moot.
Wow. Interesting. Mary Sue was a term that came out of Star Trek fan fiction.
Really?
Yes. If you've ever watched Futurama, the episode Where No Fan Has Gone Before is a great example. They have a point where this energy being forces the cast of Star Trek to act out his fanfiction script. And it is a great example of this kind of script where you have a new character introduced to the crew of the Starship Enterprise, and they are really just an avatar for the author, except they're this perfect idealized version of the author that everybody just immediately loves. They're super good at everything. They probably have a relationship with Spock or Kirk or Uhura or Bones or all of the above, and everybody's just amazed by them, and they just take center stage, and it's awful, horrible writing that's just the most dramatic and obvious form of wish fulfillment ever. And that kind of character was called a Mary Sue. It was an author's self-insertion into
Did the name come
fan
from
fiction.
like a character? Like, how do we get the name Mary
I
Sue?
could not narrow it down to that specifically enough. I would assume so.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to make sense. I was just wondering
probably
if
there was some specific fan fiction that got passed around back in the day where people were like, oh, God. And then later they'd see a character like that and go, oh, it's another Mary Sue. And then it branched out from Star Trek fan fiction into other realms of fan fiction where people be, oh, there's another Mary Sue in other forms of genre. And then it kind of expanded from there. So you'd get people pointing to a canon Sue, is the term on TV tropes, is a character who is actually in canon part of the story, who is in the cast,
regular,
but is overpowered or awkwardly, feels like a Mary Sue that has been inserted into here because someone wants to make a really engaging new character or put themselves in there. The most common example is, again, in Star Trek, Wesley Crusher.
Oh, yeah. The Wonderkin.
Exactly. He's this weirdly
literally
capable character.
Prophesied by some semi-omniscient race to be this great, wonderful leader of the Federation.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so he's often pointed to as the main canon Sue, but you can get him in plenty of places where people just, it's like, oh, I'm going to put myself in here. When so much of our media is all about wish fulfillment, it's really easy for a creator to go, I'm going to put this character that is me how I like to think I am, but it's very hard to write a character like that in a balanced way where they're actually realistic. For a counterbalance to this, actually, one of my favorite examples is The Adventures of Tom Stranger, Intergalactic Insurance Agent, or something like that, by Larry Correia, where you have this insurance agent that goes from dimension to dimension protecting his clients. And one of his primary clients is the Intergalactic Lord of Hate, Larry Correia, from another dimension, who runs this massive mega corporation spanning multiple dimensions. He's one of the most powerful people in the multidimension. And so it feels like this very like, oh yeah, you're going to cast yourself as the man who runs all these dimensions and stuff. But basically his contract with Tom Stranger is Tom Stranger has to protect all versions of the Intergalactic Lord of Hate in all dimensions. And so he ends up going to a dimension that's basically ours, where he ends up protecting this flabby, out of shape, arrogant version of the Intergalactic Lord of Hate at this Comic-Con where he's some author dude. And it's like, I thought it was hilarious. I was like, oh, that's nice to set this up.
Fun at yourself,
exactly.
yeah.
And willing to set this up as a Mary Sue and then go, nope, here's the real me. So yeah, in a more general sense, Mary Sue has evolved to the point where anytime someone sees something that they're like, oh, they're overpowered, or they're just there for wish fulfillment, for self-insertion, the Bella Swans of the world, where Bella Swan is a blank slate who exists for the purpose of teenage girls being able to project themselves onto her and take part in the story as though they were Bella Swan.
I couldn't make it past the first page.
I never even picked it up. So.
Yeah. So you get this spectrum where it goes from anywhere from the original Mary Sue to the canon Sues to characters that are just a little too heavy on the wish fulfillment and or audience avatar aspect, designed for self-insertion. Any of those someone might be calling a Mary Sue, which makes discussions about this really difficult because someone could be saying Mary Sue and meaning whatever they want. It's like Nazi, where it just gets pulled out as a generic insult that for any time anything's even remotely close to this, in my perspective, it precludes any actual rational conversation because it's so nebulous and it's just meant as an insult. So Luke versus Rey is the one I want to get into. Rey is the one that gets complained about, and my point that I'm trying to make is that Luke is every bit the Mary Sue that Rey is. So by the original definition, I feel they're actually both pretty solid Mary Sues as well, or at least canon Sues as they go. I showed you guys this a while ago, but I'm going to pull it out for the fans now. This is from a Star Wars trading card from back in the day. This is from back in the 70s or 80s.
I remember these.
Yeah.
These, yeah.
So this is a Star Wars Movie Facts number 22 of 22. Says Mark Hamill of his role in Star Wars, I realized that my character was really George Lucas while we were filming in Tunisia. When I played the scene, I did it just like I thought George would react. When I did it like that, George called cut perfect. Which, as someone else pointed out in the comments on this, it shouldn't really be that much of a revelation to people that the character named Luke S. is an author avatar as a canon Sue for George Lucas. But yeah, it's very much that this was about George creating a character that he could project himself into. And that's a pretty solid argument right there for Mark Hamill himself, that that's what was going on. In Rey's case, I'm going to get into what makes her that more
Ray, JJ, connection people.
Well, in Rey's case, it's actually more than just Rey, but Rey in particular, all of the characters, the new trilogy is very much about this new generation being handed the torch from this older generation and having to pick this up. Like, it's being made by a bunch of filmmakers that are picking up this beloved franchise from the original creators and having to move on with it. All the themes are there. There's the whole meta-narrative of both of those two new movies, and I assume of Episode 9, once it comes out, is very much what those filmmakers are going through with Star Wars right now. And so in that sense, yeah, very much Rey and Poe and Finn are all designed to be these people stepping into these roles and trying to do Star Wars. And that's exactly what's going on. And so there's definitely a certain amount of author insertion, Mary Sueing going on with both of these characters. With the more general definition, where we're talking about just a character who's maybe a little overpowered, who picks things up too easily, here are the usual complaints I see about Rey. One is she's too good of a pilot. There's no reason for her to be as good as we see her flying the Millennium Falcon around. She's too good at ship repair. A very few people will try and argue with that one, but given her occupation as a scavenger pulling apart ships, it makes sense that she'd know how these things are put together,
well,
what's
and
worthwhile, and what everything does.
I'm trying to think of what book it was before The Awakening. It's a kid's book. It's a junior
I saw that
novel.
reference when I was,
She literally helps a couple other scavengers find a ship that got buried, so it's mostly pristine. And they have to, fix it up and whatever. And they're all thinking, this is our ticket off of this terrible planet, right? And she literally is the one who's doing most of the repairs and just telling the other people, okay, this is the part I need, go find it.
Yeah.
I need this part, I need this cable, we need this battery pack or whatever.
And it makes a lot of sense given her occupation, quote unquote.
Her lifestyle,
Yeah. her rapid force gains, that she picks up the force too quickly, between the mind trick in episode 7 and using the force to move things, grabbing the lightsaber at the end of episode 7, and so forth. Her general lack of training and doing that nevertheless. And then besting Kylo Ren in the fight at the end of Force Awakens is one that a lot of people complain about, because he has been trained with a lightsaber and all of this sort of thing, and she has
As
not.
Snoke points out.
He has a history of murdering potential Jedis, and she is a potential Jedi. A more general, long-term thing from Episode 8 is her whole undermining Luke. That a lot of people feel like she is there to undermine Luke and take things over. She gets portrayed as a feminist avatar. That's why she's a Mary Sue, in this sense that she's just there to push a feminist agenda, and that's why she's undermining Luke, and she's just there to be better than Luke, and that's the whole point. Which is actually not untrue, but not in the way most people mean it. So you've got her inexplicable piloting versus his inexplicable piloting. She at least has been working with ships all her life. He's a freaking farmer.
Biggs, who is a rebel pilot.
He mentioned,
he
we get
says that
one
Luke
tell-not show that says he's the best bush pilot in the Outer Rim territories. Which again is like, that doesn't feel like wish fulfillment at all. Sure. Let's say we've got this one line from Biggs. We've got plenty of extra movie material that it tells us that Luke has had experience flying and everything, just like we have some extra movie material for Rey that says she's good at flying, so oh well. But the difference is slight. We're told that Luke is a great pilot, but again, why? He's a freaking farmer. And even if he is, saying that means he can jump into an X-Wing and fly it around is kind of like suggesting that this kid who apparently picked up flying because he was flying the crop duster on the farm is equipped to fly an F-14. No, they're completely different things. And even in the era when this was made, that was a ludicrous suggestion.
Yeah.
And even allowing for, say, okay, this is a sci-fi universe, the technology is more ubiquitous, right? Everybody has experience flying because there's flying things all over the place. Even then, for me,
it's more like driving a car rather than driving two different planes.
But even then, for me, that smacks of saying, okay, I've been driving a car all my life. I grew up driving the truck. I started driving it well before I had a driver's license.
Be a Formula
and now I can drive
driver.
it. Yeah, exactly. Now I can drive an F1 without any training. And that's just silly. I'm fine with it. Again, because the whole purpose of Luke is audience insertion here.
I would say this just as a counterpoint or whatever, to say it is a little bit more ridiculous with Rey. If you look at the level of difficulty in the maneuvers, Luke's flying of the X-Wing isn't as dexterous, I guess. Mm-hmm. Like, the maneuvers aren't quite as flashy and, like, turning on a dime and whatever, compared to Rey flying the Millennium Falcon through the guts of a Superstar Destroyer, the Ravager, by the way.
Yeah. Setting up Poe for that shot.
Yeah. It's like, that's a significant increase in skill level.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so that, I think, while I agree with your general point that, look, they're both pretty ridiculous.
I can see
Rey's
some
a little more
discrepancy, and
silly.
I've got some reasons for that. But there's another thing that I set up here that he does that she doesn't. So my next point on here is his military acumen. There's a vast difference between I can fly a plane, heck, I can even fly a fighter jet, and I can fly a fighter jet in formation with other professionals, and I am going to be so good at that I am going to be placed in ranking above people who have already been doing this.
Yeah.
In combat.
Exactly.
No
In
less.
formation, in combat, calling out call signs, responding to instructions without any apparent training. He just knows all this. He just knows how to be a military fighter pilot as part of a military unit.
In canon, how long was it from the time that Luke leaves Tatooine to the time the Death Star's trying to blow up Yavin 4?
Less than 24 hours.
I was going to say, they're being tracked.
Yeah,
because in the old novelization, there were a couple of weeks, apparently, that Luke was able to train, and that's where he had earned his spot.
No, because it's a couple of hours from the time they leave Tatooine to Alderaan.
But in the old novelization, it straight up said he had time to be in simulators, and that's where they had ranked him. So whatever the discrepancy is between the old book and canon, but...
Even so, it's like this random farmer just showed up, and he did well enough that he's not the first one to make an attack run, but when he does make an attack run, he's giving orders to the other guys that are left, because he is ranked above Wedge Antilles and his own friend Biggs, who has been doing this for a while now.
I don't know that he necessarily is ranked above officially at that point. I think it was just more of a, hey, I've got the shot, I'm lined up, can I get some cover? Okay, yeah, we'll cover you.
But they all have to be lined up in order to do that. There's no reason they couldn't shift around and someone else take point.
Sure.
It happens because Luke is the protagonist, and therefore Luke gets to do it.
Yeah.
That's the real reasoning, and it's fine. I don't have any problems with how Luke is portrayed.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, when you really stop and think about them, they're somewhat comparable.
Also, just by way of general disclaimer for this episode, I don't think any three of us really have a problem with Rey.
No, not at all.
Yeah, Rey's a little bit of a Mary Sue, so is Luke. I don't particularly care either way on either of them.
Yeah, and a lot of the complaints I see too, the reasons I want to answer this is because I have seen published authors who are complaining about the bad writing of Rey, and I go, no, this is you just being a biased a-hole.
Yeah.
So
well, in defense of Rey, we haven't seen her do anything that Anakin wasn't doing in episode 1, right?
Well, lightsaber usage aside.
Yeah.
Okay, true.
True. That. But piloting.
In particular. Yeah. And I always like to think
these are all things that have been established in canon as the Force helps you with this.
Right.
Anakin is told specifically in the movie that he has raced before in a pod race.
True, but the fact that he could do it at all.
At that age, in particular.
Yeah.
Well, even as a species, humans weren't supposed to be able to pod race.
You have to have Jedi reflexes.
Right. Rey flying the Falcon, I mean, that's the Force helping her. There's an easy enough explanation, which we've had before, you know. As far as fighting with the lightsaber, I think I might have mentioned it here on the podcast before, but it always looked to me like she was downloading the information from Kylo in that moment.
There is actually apparently a section in the book that hints towards that. I don't particularly need or, it's like, okay.
Well, but again, I know we did talk about how anytime we see Rey doing something with the Force on purpose, it's after having had it like done to her or done around her.
Yeah, she's picking things up quickly.
Right.
With the fighting in particular, Luke's lack of training is one thing that people complain about. And I saw one author specifically talking about this on Facebook where I just shook my head because he was talking about how, she's pulling things to her with the Force and she's doing this where Luke had all this training before he could do that and she didn't. And I went, whoa, no, Luke had time. He had absolutely zero training in between when he started doing that and when he first learned about the Force. He had never done that because that aspect of the Force
in Obi-Wan's hut, and then they don't really talk about the Force anymore till they're on the Millennium Falcon a few hours later.
On the Falcon, he gets
a
brief
little
training
hours training at most.
Yeah, where he basically picks it up right away.
Yeah.
Like, he immediately starts blocking blaster bolts blind.
Yeah, it's...
With literally I failed a couple times. Here, let's cover your eyes. Now you did it. That's not real training. He just does it because he's a protagonist, and protagonists picking things up ridiculously quickly is a grand old tradition of Hollywood and books and movies, all the stories we tell. Yeah. It happens left and right. Luke, he picked that up really fast. He had no training between episode 4 and 5. He learned to move things with his mind. That's awesome. But there was no actual training. And then, all the training he actually does get is a week. If we're really stretching it out, maybe 2 or 3, depending on how vague we're being with the time frame here in Empire Strikes Back. The fighting one is one that gets brought up a lot too. It's like, she beat Kylo Ren, and you hear the usual examples of, he was injured, he was hot-headed and not behaving intelligently. All of these are true and help justify it. But the main thing in the end is she has experience fighting, unlike Luke. Again, as a farmer that we know of, he never had any experience fighting.
Yeah.
None of the training we see him get from Yoda involves a lightsaber in any way, shape, or form. Obviously, Vader is not actually trying to kill him at the end of Empire Strikes Back, but he's still using a lightsaber better than he has any right to based on what we've seen. But if it's okay for him to have maybe picked it up at some point, I don't see why it's not okay for her to have maybe picked this up at some point. Especially since she grew up in a far more hostile environment than he did.
And it makes sense, too, where, you look at her staff training and stuff. Clearly, this is a girl who knows how to defend herself with a long stick.
Yes.
So, now, a lot of long stick happens to be made of lightsaber. What's the difference, A
lot of people like to complain about, the difference between a quarterstaff and a longsword is massively different. Having done both of these, at least as stage combat training, it's not massively different. It is different.
It is different, but you're acquiring skills that are applicable in a...
Correct.
In a wider
there are
field.
Principles that would travel across, In that case, it would be, yes.
Yeah.
It is
and especially because plenty of people who know swordsmanship have looked at that fight and gone, she doesn't really know what she's doing with that. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of wide swings and moves that aren't really great choices. And you are projecting a more idealized version of that character. You've got a more idealized version in your head than was actually put on the page, which happens all the time. We all do this.
So like everyone did with Luke in Last Jedi.
Exactly. It gets into a term that I call competitive idealization. I came up with this while writing the notes last night.
And I love that term. I was looking at your notes, and I thought that is a really beautiful way to express that. Really well done.
I am really happy with it.
We have this idealized version of them in our heads, and then when other people point out things that weren't great about them or whatever, we're like, that's not how it was. Yeah. But if you actually stop to think about it, you would realize you're doing this anyway.
That's part of why this conversation, I feel, is very valid to the world in general, because it's not something we just do with characters. try sitting down and voicing some legitimate complaints about the way Barack Obama presidented, and there's a good 60% of the country that's going to immediately hate you for it. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I don't have major problems with Barack Obama. I do have some nitpicks about certain things he did, but it's like, I don't hate the guy. I feel like if I met him, we'd probably have a nice time talking. It's just that he gets so idealized by so many people because of his
You're
status.
telling me that people are people with flaws and they're not perfect?
Exactly.
Chris,
exactly.
You're unreasonable.
But this is a thing where it's like, you can't say anything negative about...
Right.
And this happens with celebrities, with other politicians, left and right.
It's funny that you bring up politics, because I sit here and think about, okay, what are instances where I've observed this happening? And I think politics and geek fandoms are the two most rabid culprits of this, where it's whatever... And well, yeah, and religion, that's true. They're the most rabid about whatever it is that I have decided I am in the camp of. That is what is perfect and has no flaws, and it's wonderful, and I will never acknowledge any flaws, and heaven help you if you point anything out.
So, why does Luke have to win?
He's who we're supposed to love.
He is the original protagonist.
And that's the thing, is he's supposed to be the hero. He's who we're following through the original trilogy.
He was the hero, just not more of a hero than Ahsoka.
Hush. You shut your mouth.
I love needling Ross, listeners.
Because he's our favorite. You know, it's just...
He's the original. Mm-hmm. It puts him on a pedestal that no one else can quite match. But when we're actually delving into what we saw them do over the course of this series, it was hard to argue that Ahsoka didn't deserve it, right? But that feeling that, no, but it should be Luke. I feel like that's part of that competitive idealization. It's part of this notion that, and like, I get it.
And definitely some nostalgia at play where it should be Luke, right? He was my childhood hero. He was who I pretended to be when I was an 8-year-old swinging around a glow-in-the-dark baseball bat.
Right. Most of us did that. Like, I love The Last Jedi. Watching Last Jedi the first time, I was sitting there going, what are they doing to Luke? What is this? Like, no, you can't do that with Luke Skywalker. But that's part of why we're having this discussion now, is because that movie made me go, wait, why not? Like, this is good character writing. This is what you're supposed to do when you're writing a character. Why am I upset? And I realized that at least part of it is this competitive idealization, that Luke is the original, Luke is the big one, so therefore he has to always be the best. And so anything that can potentially be perceived as a threat to Luke's supremacy as the central hero of Star Wars, forever and always, gets some pretty
it's backlash. A threat, and we treat it like a threat.
Yeah, exactly. But Luke was always designed to be this kind of audience insert, author insert. Yeah, he's more capable than he logically should be, but that's okay, because that's the point of these sort of stories. It's fun. So why is it, though, that people are so much more bothered by Rey? And I came up with a couple reasons. The first one I have listed here as the obvious. There are sexist jerks out there. And that's the most obvious one that people jump to. It is, in my personal opinion, by far not the most common reason.
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. I think it's the most obvious thing that people jump to for an explanation, but I don't think the number of sexist people who are going, we shouldn't have a woman being this powerful, is probably close to nothing. I mean, there's a handful of people who genuinely are that way, and, and I've seen the comments, so I know that they are there, but it is not, well, Last Jedi failed because the entire audience is sexist and they can't handle a woman being powerful. Yeah. I'm like, that's not
you can
even
dislike
close.
Rey without being sexist.
Just like I dislike Rose, not because she's a woman, but because I think the character is poorly written. I know Chris is gonna argue
Rose here too,
but that's why I look at her character and I go, I don't like the way you're written. I think the choices they had your character make are dumb. That's why I don't like you. If a man were making those same decisions, I would have the same problem with that character.
I feel like a lot of people would have been fine with Poe getting a smackdown if it hadn't been from a woman, because, and it's not just that, oh, it's sexist, it's because people are going, oh, it's because they're being sexist at men. It's like they're trying to make some huge feminist point, and that's what they're upset about, not whether or not you're being sexist. But I do think there is some different motivation there, that people are upset because they feel like they're being lectured about something they're not that concerned about, or about something that they get lectured about a lot.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, that happens a lot. It's not necessarily people going, oh, it's a woman and therefore this is annoying. It's people going, we're getting lectured about this again? Great. She's a woman, he's a man, she's right, he's wrong, whatever. That's not how things necessarily always work. We get lectured about this so much. And that does happen a lot. Anyway, jumping back to Rey. So the next one, a less presumptuous explanation that I came up with, is that, yes, Rey is a Mary Sue wish fulfillment character, just like Luke was, but the difference is, for a lot of these people, she is someone else's wish fulfillment Mary Sue character. And it's like, Luke is me. I'm a young man. She is not me. She's a young woman. I still like her, sure, but I do not like her, especially not just that she is a character for someone else, but that she is a character for someone else that I perceive as exceeding my wish fulfillment character. And that is very upsetting. Which I'm like, on the one hand, that's not unreasonable. On the other hand, why does your wish fulfillment character have to be the best one? And again, on that same side, part of the wish fulfillment for, I think, a lot of women is that she gets to be better than the men and get recognized for it in some sense. Like, that is part of the appeal of a lot of these so-called feminist propaganda plots, is just that there are a lot of women who really don't get recognized for being better than the men around them.
Right.
Or even as good as the men around them. And that's part of the, like, here, let's let you have that in your media.
And this was something that I disagreed with or didn't understand until I had girls of my own. Because before I had kids, I was always like, who cares? You know, you can identify with Luke even if you're a girl. A hero is a hero is a hero. And then as my girls were growing up and always pretending to be the boys in whatever they were playing, which I was like, you know,
Which is hilarious because my boys are constantly playing as the girls in everything they pick up. I'm like,
Really?
Yeah, it's great.
And I was like, you know, this is sad that there isn't a girl for them to identify with. Mm-hmm. When they got old enough and I introduced them to Clone Wars, they loved Ahsoka. But I was like, this is great that now there is a girl that they can... And even though Chris hates Rogue One, they were excited to pretend to be Jyn.
Rogue One is one of my favorite examples of this. I read it was a little just post online. I think it was a Facebook post that got shared around a bunch. It was a guy, he was Hispanic, Latino American, second generation immigrant. His father was first generation immigrant.
This story.
And so he didn't speak English very well. He was an older man. I don't know where he was from exactly, but he took his father to see this movie, and his father came out of it just going, did you hear him? Cassian Andor, he's just like, he has the same accent as me. And he's on screen in this huge blockbuster. That's so cool. Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah, it is. Like, the fact that this old man was just so delighted by that he got to see someone like him on screen. Like, I've got all my complaints about Rogue One, but I will take 1,000 more Rogue Ones just for that moment. Like, that's totally worth everything.
No, there is actual power and value in specifically creating somebody else's hero, you know, that they can identify with more closely. And I'm like, okay, and this is great, but what bothers me is when they do it at the expense of somebody else's hero, where it's...
Like we were talking about
in the last episode, Leia's only great because everybody else is incompetent. Well, then Leia's not that great of a hero. Like, make her great in the midst of competent people. That makes her even more great. So doing things like that is where I'm happy with it. And that's why I didn't necessarily like Holdo. You kind of hit it on the head, is where it's kind of like, it got preachy, where it's like, women are better than men. Here you go. Here's Holdo. And it's like, well, Holdo can be good and a cool leader and an interesting character without having to also say, and she's better than you are, you know?
Well, and I said in the Last Jedi episode, my problem with Holdo was mainly that the movie seemed to expect me to consider her perfect. And, you know, I've heard plenty of people talking about how, like, that was not a good way to handle that situation. Ask anyone in the military. I've not asked anyone in the military, but I've heard quite a few people in the military going, oh yeah, we've got a handbook of instructions that dictates exactly how to deal with a situation like that. And she basically handled it in the worst way possible. There are times when you can really stress, this is the military order, you need to learn your place and all that sort of thing, because that is important to learn. But in a last-ditch situation where mutiny is a constant and very real possibility, that is not a great choice. And again,
more of
I'm
a carrot than a stick.
I love her more as a flawed character than I do as a real character in that sense. I'm fine with her making that choice. It's just that the movie expects me to go, yeah, of course she's right about everything. And I'm like, she's right about 90%. And I would have liked if you'd acknowledge that 10% and make this two flawed people arguing instead of one perfect person that isn't actually perfect and one flawed person, you know? I feel like it would have been stronger.
I agree.
But again, it also would have taken up more runtime. And I get why, you know, it's like, when it gets down to it, when you've already got 5 character arcs going on in one movie, there's not a lot of wiggle room. But yeah, this difficulty of seeing someone else surpassing the one I perceive as mine, that's rough. And there's even a more generous explanation for, like, because I feel like a lot of people, it's not necessarily this us versus them thing, although that, you know, that happens. We all us versus them. I don't really have trouble identifying with Rey. And I'm sure that for a lot of guys, that's the case. Rey works great as a general audience avatar, and she's intended to. And so I feel like that doesn't quite justify the vehemence.
Yeah.
There's a certain sense of just that Luke established the baseline. Like, Luke was the very first Jedi we ever met. Like, the very first person we ever saw learn to be a Jedi, at least. Mm-hmm. And he's the son of Vader. He's super uber powerful. We get this all established right up front that he is extra normal. He's the baseline for exceptionalism, you know? And when you combine that with these nostalgia goggles of he's the hero, he has to be the best, you get a lot of people that it's not necessarily that they're looking at her and going, oh, she's someone else's. It's just that they're going, no, this is the
baseline has already been established.
And
we already have the
baseline
standard.
is probably the wrong world. It's the cap line, where it's like, this is the best. Mm-hmm. You can't be better than the best. We've already established that this is supposed to be the best.
Right.
Or even just the fact that in some ways I can identify this as being faster or more exceptional than what I've already established in my head as the cap line. It's wholly arbitrary to say that this Mary Sue is okay, but this Mary Sue is not because her flight maneuvers are slightly better, or because she's better in a fight than this one doofus that is really just this dweeb who's obsessed, this Star Wars cosplayer. It is arbitrary. And that's why I like to bring it up, because it's like, no, look at why you're saying she can't be better than Luke. You know, what are your reasons for saying that Luke is okay and that Rey is not? Because I think when you delve into him, you're going to find that your reasoning for saying that Luke is okay is fairly arbitrary. Like, it's just that one was the original and one isn't, and therefore you're okay and you're not.
Though even if they don't necessarily have a problem with it, because I don't feel like I have a problem with Rey. I enjoy Rey as a character. But this discussion is helping me sort of identify some of these things that I have felt myself thinking and feeling, you know what I mean? Because while I like Rey, I definitely don't like her as much as Luke from the original trilogy.
And that's fine.
It's funny though, because actually,
as we sit here and have this discussion, I'm just going, Chris, again, as I have said many times on this podcast, Chris is articulating my feelings better than I could. Yeah, that's been me. Whether I knew it or not, I've been thinking these same things. And it is, I fully admit, because of nostalgia. Because when I think of Luke, I think of myself as a little kid sitting in front of the TV, watching it going, I want to be that guy, kicking butt with a lightsaber, saving his buddies. That's who I would pretend to be. And the weird thing with nostalgia is you can't really get rid of it. Like, once it's in there, it's in there. You know what I mean? And any good hero that they might produce, it's still not going to come close for how I feel about Luke and Han.
It's always going to be easier to turn a critical eye on something new than on something I've nostalgia for. Mm-hmm. Like, one of my favorite examples that I realized recently was people complaining about Canto Bight being pointless. As I got thinking about it, I was like, you know, if you want a side plot where a bunch of characters are doing stuff that doesn't really impact the plot while waiting for a Jedi to complete their training, Episode 5, man. Most everything in the entire chase sequence and going to Cloud City is relatively superfluous to the plot, aside from just establishing locations and
the asteroid field is completely pointless, aside from just showing us
and it's
cool
fun.
space.
It's fun spectacle.
It is fun.
It's engaging, and nobody has a problem with it. I don't want them to have a problem with it, but it's like if you do have a problem with Canto Bight, and there are pacing issues, there are issues, but it's like, you know, try and stop and look at Empire Strikes Back without the nostalgia goggles, at least from a writing standpoint, which is, I feel like, the area where I am most equipped to strip away the nostalgia. That's not the most useful sequence. It does have fluff and filler and is mainly passing time in an interesting way, but not actually advancing character or plot, aside from from Han and Leia's relationship in one scene.
Yeah.
And that's great. It's a great movie. It's routinely hailed as the best Star Wars movie for a reason. None of that is a problem. But if it wasn't a problem then we should be able to stop and go, why is it a problem now, if that is happening?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's kind of the gist of this whole episode is let's have consistent standards, people. You know, like... Or
even if you don't, just stop and look.
Or just
stop and try and acknowledge where maybe you don't have consistent standards. You don't want to strip those away? That's fine. Just maybe be a little aware so that you're a little less vehement next time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I generally feel like understanding yourself, understanding what other people are doing, is always going to improve people's relations with one another. Period. Like, it does, even if you understand someone perfectly down to their core and they are a deplorable person, simply having that understanding will make them easier to deal with. But so then spectacle escalation, power creep in games is usually the term. Yeah. Where pick up Magic the Gathering. You started with this original game that has had more and more and more cards added to it over time, and those cards need to differentiate themselves from the ones that came before, but still provide something new and exciting for people, and you inevitably get this kind of power creep where new cards are coming out that completely break the original game. They're just too powerful, they've gone too far.
Or to keep it on Star Wars, Fantasy Flight Games X-Wing. Every wave that came out, and they would release 4 waves a year, every wave would have a new ship or a new upgrade card that allowed some new ridiculous combo that basically meant if you don't have this new wave, you are not competitive, period. Yeah. Like, they will just curb stomp you. And every wave was like that. And it got so bad that now just this year. And it came out in 2014, I think. So 5 years later, they had to completely start over, X-Wing 2.0, reissue the base game because it got so imbalanced, so out of whack.
Yeah. And that happens all the time. And in movie series in particular, or television shows, I call it spectacle escalation, where spectacle is part of what draws us into these things, and you need to escalate, show us something new and evolved. But when what you're showing us is more space fights, more, starship chase scenes, more lightsaber fights, it's going to get harder and harder to show us something new without it seeming ridiculous in comparison to what came before. They said when you get into a lot of the things that happened in the extended universe, this was one of the big problems. Is that I remember there's a scene in the Hand of Thrawn duology that Timothy Zahn wrote, where he's coming back to the Star Wars extended universe after like a decade away, and he's writing this series of books that takes place a decade later, and it's all about, and basically Luke's central thing in that was realizing that his say excessively flashy use of the Force, you could say, is too much. Like, he's overusing the Force is kind of the idea he gets to, where he's like, maybe I need to be a more peaceful, meditative, like starts getting into a kind of a Yoda sense. Yeah. And as I was reading it, I was like 14 at the time, and even then I read it and I went, oh, all of those got too absurd, got too flashy, you couldn't top it anymore, so this is your reset button. This is you going, okay, yeah, Luke can do all of this, I need a reason why he's not.
For some ridiculous examples of power creep in the EU books, you had the Super Star Destroyer, right, that we see in episode 6, or 5 and 6. Then we get the Eclipse Super Star Destroyer. It's even bigger. It has a Death Star laser built into it. Whoa! Now, that's not big enough, so now we have World Destroyers, is what they were called. They would literally come down and tear apart molecule by molecule a planet. That's not good enough. So now we have the Sun Crusher, right? Destroying a whole planet, that's for sissies. I can nuke a star and destroy the entire solar system, And I think about it in the movies, too. Episode 4, we get the Death Star and its destruction. Looks awesome. But episode 6's Death Star destruction, not only does the Death Star look more interesting because it's unfinished, but its explosion is actually a cooler looking explosion.
Well, and even
then we get episode 7.
Instead of flying down a trench and blowing it up, we have to fly into it and explode it up from the inside.
And the Death Star itself was larger.
The Death Star was larger. We get the Executor crashing into it. But then episode 7, we get Star Killer Base, and it's destroying 5 planets.
Yeah.
And now we're, in episode, and then just as far as visually spectacular, in canon it's not as spectacular, but visuals anyway, Holdo's hyperspace ram is a stunning piece of visual work. I mean, it's beautiful. I think it's totally stupid, but it's beautiful. I will not argue that it is not probably the most spectacle-y thing in Star Wars, because it is. And what is 9 going to bring us?
Exactly. It becomes harder and harder to expand it without it getting absurd. Because you had Starkiller Base in number 7, where plenty of people rolled their eyes at that, where it's just like, great, this time the Death Star's built into a whole planet and can destroy several planets at once. And it is. I was a little worried when that happened, because I was like, this is what the extended universe did before. Do we really want to do this again? And the reason it happens is because it's hard to escalate spectacle without going to ever further lengths of absurdity. And which is why sequences like the Hammerhead in
Rogue One
is very well done. Where that's a really neat, inventive thing that makes sense in the universe. It
and
fits
was a
with
beautiful
everything.
spectacle.
And it was great spectacle. It was really cool to watch happen. That's a good example of how these things can be done well. With Rey's flying, I look at that and I'm like, okay, part of the reason this is happening this way is because if they gave you her flying on par with what we saw from Luke in episode 4, we'd all be bored. Like, just from a spectacle, from a writing standpoint, that would be a bad choice. So even if it is slightly more absurd to have her flying this way than if it makes her greater than Luke, quote unquote, well, you wouldn't be happy with the movie if she wasn't doing that either. Like, we got to it, and that's a pretty solid action scene, like that gives us flying around and doing cool things without it being too out of character with what we've seen from all the other Star Wars movies. Solid. I like it. But and that's why this happens, is because we can't just have her. We already know all the things that she can do. We can't go through her discovering the Force again, bit by bit by bit by bit, because we already know it all. It will be boring for us to watch her discover what we already know. Whereas with Luke, we were discovering it for the first time. And which actually gets into the final justification for Rey.
Before you do that, is there a way to then solve it without, to make it interesting for us, but to have it make sense in canon? Like, could we say, could we have Rey meet Luke and then say, and now she's been on the island for a year, and now she can do the lightsaber stuff. Now she has this Force Master. Like, is there...
It also depends on the story you want to tell, though, because it wouldn't work with this story, because the whole point is that Luke doesn't want to train her. Mm-hmm. So no, we can't do that here.
Well, and that is kind of what they are going to be doing for this next episode, though, because it does take place sometime after.
And that's part of what we lost with Last Jedi being set immediately after, is a lot of the things that people point to where it's like, oh, Luke had this, or this happened, and this happened. It's like, no, there was just a big enough time gap for you to be comfortable assuming something like that happened in between. We weren't ever actually shown Luke learning to move things with his mind. As far as we know, that's literally the first time he did it in the Warp Cave. That, it's probably there's some extended universe thing at this point.
There is.
Yeah, I'm sure that shows us that. But
he moves noodles.
Yeah, but as far as most people who are arguing about
that's his first time moving an object is like a little ramen noodle with some Nerf nuggets.
Okay.
That's hilarious.
Yep.
But as far as anyone knew at the time, or most people who are arguing about this know, no, none of that ever happened. That was the first time he did it, and they were fine with it because they assumed, oh, well, he's grown in the intervening time. That's fine. Last Jedi taking place right after was important for the story they're telling and made a lot of sense in a lot of ways, but it did rob people of the easier suspension of disbelief of, oh, sure, time hand waves a lot. But so the biggest justification for Rey, though, for what she can do and what she does, is that she is us. Rey, I'll link to this in the liner notes, and I'll share it in the Facebook group because I loved this video. It was by Movie Bob Chipman, a movie critic that I follow and enjoy. He does videos on YouTube, and he had one titled Why the Last Jedi is a Love Letter to Star Wars Fans. And I really enjoyed it because it basically delves into what I mentioned earlier, where all these new characters are avatars for these new creators taking up the mantle and da-da-da-da-da. But Rey in particular is also an avatar for Star Wars fans in general. Mm-hmm. And Rey and Kylo both. Like, Kylo is the negative side of fandom, she is the positive side of fandom. Where you've got, and that's why I call him, it's like, he's basically a Darth Vader cosplayer. He has this suit and this mask that he wears that he doesn't need. They don't do anything. He's just cosplaying as Darth Vader. He's got this absurd lightsaber that's even cooler than the other lightsabers because it's kind of this Mary Sue-ish thing where he's got to be better, he's got to be cooler, but his instincts on that are off. and where he's very angry, he's lashing out at everyone around him. He perceives himself as being owed something by the Star Wars universe, even though there's no reason why it should owe him anything. He's got massive expectations from everyone, but isn't living up to anyone else's expectations. Like, he's very much the negative side of fandom in general, not just the Star Wars fandom, but in this case, yes, Star Wars fandom. And then you've got Rey. Like, and he points out a couple things, like, Rey lives in a fallen AT-AT walker. She's got a little Rebel pilot doll on the shelf. She's got her own little non-functioning Rebel pilot helmet that she wears just for fun. Mm-hmm. She daydreams about this. She knows all the stories, which for us are the Star Wars stories. For her are actual in-life stories about what happened 30 years ago. Yeah. But she knows, when they hear about Han Solo, she knows who Han Solo is. She knows about the Force. She's asking, is it true? And that's part of why she picks all this up so fast, is because for Luke, this was forgotten legends that he had never heard, and he was learning it all for the first time and having to pick it up bit by bit, just like we all were. Whereas Rey grew up with this. She knows all stories. She can That's
genius.
Yeah, she can manipulate, she can Jedi mind trick a stormtrooper for the first time much more quickly than Luke did, because she knows that's possible. She's basically instead of feeling things out going, I have no idea what I'm doing, she's feeling things out going,
she's like, wait, I heard somebody
if I have the
this.
Force, I should be able to do this, right? And after a couple tries, she managed it. And it was easily the least impressive version of the Jedi mind trick. It's basically just this overwhelming force of, just go do this. Oh, it worked. Great. But she knows she should be able to move things with the Force. That is actually a really brilliant insight,
though. I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah, and it goes further than that, though, because the whole plot of Last Jedi is that we have Luke, who is disillusioned with the legend of Luke Skywalker, with Star Wars, with the fact that the world does not match up to these over-idealized stories that we tell. That real people fall and fail, and nothing in real life ever quite lives up to the magic of these really cool stories that we tell. No one's as good as these heroes. Nothing works out as perfectly as these stories do. Luke is an in-universe avatar for all of the people out there who dismiss Star Wars as being important because it's not grown up enough, because it's not realistic enough, because of any of these things. And Rey is the dedicated Star Wars fan who comes to those people to say, no, this is important. You are that person, even if you're not quite living up to it. You can still be that person. We can all be that good. This is all still that important. And convincing them to step back in and love Star Wars again. Which is why it's important that at the end, Luke, the way the movie Bob put it, I loved, basically, Kylo is not defeated by Luke at the end. He is defeated by a movie projection of Luke. This isn't who Luke is. This is him. He gives himself the haircut. He's wearing the clothes. He's got the lightsaber. He is projecting the legend of Luke Skywalker. That idealized version that he dismissed, that he couldn't live up to, that broke him for trying to live up to, he's projecting that, and this bad fanboy is defeated by the legend of Luke Skywalker. As he's trying to say that Luke learns that Star Wars still has value, and he defeats the bad guys using the legend of Star Wars, and creates new legends for a new generation. And that's an important point that he put out there, where it's like, this isn't dismissing Luke. This isn't about making Luke weaker or not as good. The point at the end is that he, to a certain degree, though he was broken, though he failed to live up to that legend, he still was that person. And he still, it's at the very end, we got these kids playing with dolls again. Again, the audience inserts. And they're not telling stories about Rey lifting the rocks out of the way, because this wasn't Rey's story, it was Luke's. They're telling the story of how Luke, the legend, walked out and defeated the First Order all on his own, and it's inspiring a new generation. It's very much about saying, Luke, everything that you've always felt about Star Wars, that you want it to be that important, yeah, it is. And you're right for loving it, and you're right for being as sincere as Rey is in your desire to see more of it, and it does do good in the world. That's the whole point. It's very much focused on Luke. Rey's whole purpose there is to be the fanboy saying, hey, come on, let's do this again and believe in it and see the value here. And so when people complain about Rey being a Mary Sue, I'm kind of like, but guys, yeah, she is, but that's the point, is she's all of us getting to step in here and tell all the people who neg on Star Wars that Star Wars is genuinely that good and important. Like, come on. Who doesn't want to do that? And
not the three of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Our very first episode was us discussing how important these are.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's great. Although I'm angry, it's making me want to go watch Last Jedi with new appreciation, and I'm just hating myself for that decision. I need to take myself out back and have myself flogged.
I'm going to drag you towards liking The Last Jedi bit by
kicking
bit
and screaming.
Yeah.
Very much against my will.
I will say, even I am starting to like Rogue One a bit more.
Yay!
There you go. So, and then my final thing that I wanted to talk about here is the popularity, the reasons why these self-insertion wish fulfillment protagonists are so popular, and the hazards behind them. Like, I'm not saying they're bad things, but they are freaking everywhere. This is the primary form of protagonist in mass media these days. Harry Potter is one of these. Hermione wasn't one of these, but got made into one of these by the fandom. It's like, pick a major franchise, and this is probably what's at play here. Anywhere, everywhere. They're usually characterized in a couple different ways. You've got people picking up new skills with rather absurd quickness, especially because in universe it will usually be a startlingly quick. Like, people will be like, well, I'm going to train you in this, and then go, wow, you picked that up way faster than I expected. You're really good. It'll be someone being absurdly good at something. It's like, oh yeah, they are the very best in the world, in the galaxy, in the universe at this thing. That's not a bad thing to have a character who's the very best at something, but statistically, the vast majority of stories going on in the real world do not feature anyone who's the very best at anything at all.
Yep.
Which is why it's a form of wish fulfillment. And you get...
I've thought about this, and this will kind of tie into the next episode we record, but I was thinking about this, about D&D, right? When you play D&D, your players, they're typically, by the end of your story, they're going to be the best wizard or the best ranger or the best rogue or whatever. They're going to be the best at whatever it is they do, and that's part of the fun. It's part of the wish fulfillment. And that's why we play D&D, right? Is because let me go do all these cool things that I can't get away with in real life.
Exactly.
Like murdering everyone I come across. Okay?
We'll get into that.
But I was thinking about this. Is it... And I started thinking about D&D, like, okay, specifically I was thinking about Critical Role, right? That you have a group of heroes in Vox Machina, that they literally are the saviors of Exandria. Okay, great. And so I was thinking, like, do these stories, revolve, like, what if this was real, would the story revolve around these people because they're amazing, or are they amazing because the story revolves around them? I think is kind of what we're talking about here, and I'm like, well, no, think about the real world people that think of the stories we talk about. A lot of times it's because that person stepped up and did amazing things, and that's why the story
absolutely
happened.
There's
not because the story happened, and stories don't necessarily have to happen always around the amazing best people, but they tend to, because amazing best people generate stories.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the
reasons. I did a terrible job explaining that. I'm sorry, everybody.
No, I think you did a great job. But yeah, this is one of the reasons it's not a negative phenomenon. Like, I want to emphasize, if you're listening to this going, oh, you're going to tell us how we're supposed to have fun, we can't just go enjoy ourselves. No, do it. It's great. I love these. Like, I have one of the first full-length novel I ever, well, it wasn't a full-length novel. My first longer than average novella that I wrote. I wrote it for Brandon Sanderson's class at BYU. And the two main characters of this that I want to build an entire series around are this man who has basically become a demigod over time, who fuels himself with fire and can spew it out or suck it in a demand, and is just this absurdly powerful hero. And his wife, who is basically a magical savant who can pick up new magics with absurd ease and is just this near genius level person who can fly around and do all this other. I love spectacle. I love these overpowered heroes. Like, they're a blast. I've written so many of them, and I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm just saying be aware of what the negatives are so that you can avoid them. Especially whether you're a writer or not. But so
I guess I thought of another example too, more Star Wars related, right? Like, so if in the Star Wars universe where all these stories are actually happening, there is a person named Rey, no parents, from Jakku, who really is this amazing at all these things, wouldn't it stand to reason then that in this reality, that person probably has a greater likelihood of, coming out ahead of the rest of the pack in terms of doing amazing things and generating legends around her, if there really is a person who is those things? So, and with Rey, there's a great message too there, where it's her arc in The Last Jedi is that she is afraid to step out, and she can't believe that she could be the person doing that, which is why she's trying to get Luke to do it. Then she tries to get Kylo Ren to do it. Yeah, it can't be me. I'm a nobody. It can't be me doing those things. And the message there is, you can. You can be that person who does that. You can step up and accomplish the things you want to and be the amazing person. That's a great message. Yep. Love that message. Star Wars is great. That's one of the great things about all of these, is that, so at their best, they are very engaging. They're fun to watch. They're and exciting. They're just they make for good fun, and they are hopefully ennobling. Like at their best, they are showing us the best of ourselves and what we can be. And more than that, they're encouraging you to be those things. Pursue it. Exactly. Yeah. Which is the point of both Luke and Rey and Han and everyone else in this. That Han is a less than reputable person who steps up and becomes one of the good guys. Like, that's a great thing to put out there for people to look at. And they're easy in a good way. Like, they're easy to understand. They're like, and this is like not what you're thinking. No. They are simple characters. A couple of jokes. Yeah, like, it's especially when you don't have a lot of time in an action plot or something to focus on. There's not a lot of screen time to really get into the depths of what a character is doing. It's easier to have someone who is relatively simple and straightforward and idealized, because we can all understand that. Like, it's part of what Rogue One was built on, where it's like, we've got these tropes, we can all fit
them into these slots in our mind, and so then we can just run with it. It's part of why it worked for so many people, is because we already know who these people are supposed to be, so we're good. And this isn't really a movie about delving into the intricacies of that. But when it's done poorly, there are plenty of downsides. They can often be very predictable and or excessively simple. Where it's like, where there are plenty of plots that it's just like, okay, I know exactly where this is going because I know exactly what archetype you're using here without any deviation.
Like that kid that wrote the dumb Dragon series books, the Aragons.
Yeah, where he's...
I tried reading those, and I got like one chapter in, and I'm like, wow, I already know exactly where this is going.
Cobbled together out of
super predictable.
I feel so bad for him because I always look at that and I'm like, man, if you had picked up my very first thing I ever started writing, it was horribly derivative. Like, just massively so. And
I liked it, but that's also because I like what you stole it from.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's right, because when I started doing it, you tried your hand at it too and started creating some stuff. And that's what made me realize I was doing it, because I looked at what you had done and I was like, you stole this from me. You stole this from the story I told you about, and you don't even seem to know. Jeez, I can't believe he did that. And then I looked at my stuff and went, oh no. Oh man. Oh, and everybody does that with their first story. Like, that's how we learn to tell stories by cobbling them out of other people's.
Yep.
And Christopher Paolini's misfortune, quote unquote, because he's very successful, is that he was published by his parents, and the two people in the world who were least equipped to see the flaws in his stories, like to realize that their brilliant son was very derivative. His work was what everyone else was producing as well, and that's why it's YA. It's fine for YA because there's plenty of people who don't know all those tropes and cliches, who aren't familiar with these characters. So that's the first time they're seeing them, and for them it's very original. But at its worst, it can be problematic because we know where it's going. My problem with Krennic in Rogue One was just like, as soon as I realized that he was the main villain, I also realized that it's so that they could give him a Disney death at the end. Well, that's less fun, once you already know what's happening. They are...
Krennic is coming out for Legion here real soon. I can't wait.
They are potentially self-degrading. So this is when you get people who are occupying this role, but they are not those idealized people. When you have anti-heroes or villains that are being held up.
Is this actual anti-heroes or quote-unquote
quote-unquote,
anti-heroes?
Yes. If you look at my notes, I've got quote marks around because we're not talking about real anti-heroes. But although, there are scenarios where I've seen people take real anti-heroes from classical literature and go, but this person's great. And it's like, no. The whole point of that person is that they are horrible. That's the point, is that they are not the hero, but they're put in the hero's role. You're not supposed to idealize them. You're supposed to loathe them. They're not a good example. And that's the thing, is these kind of characters, these self-insert characters, they're often designed for us to self-insert for our worser tendencies, to be able to, in video games, when you're talking about going around and murdering people in D&D, to do that. That's... Again, I'm not even saying that's a bad thing, as long as you recognize that this is you exercising your worst impulses, and it's not something that you glorify. Because
let's be real, listeners, there are some people, there are some times where you're like, it'll be so much easier in a video game to just end you right now, and I don't have to deal with you.
Yeah, and it can be, there are plenty of debates about all of this, but for me, I look at most video games, it's like, this is burning off aggression in a healthy manner that does not affect the people around you in a negative way. Mm-hmm. And that's okay, but when people are holding up characters that are not good as some sort of ideal that we should strive to,
I feel personally attacked by this. All of my love on the Empire and Tarkin.
What are you talking about? The Empire's great. But...
And of course, I just want you listeners to know, Ross and I, we have been on opposite sides of this for a long, long time.
Oh, yeah.
Like, almost right away. Like, when I first met Ross, I was still... good-hearted and somewhat decent person. And then I quickly fell to the dark side. Didn't take 3 movies. But Ross has stayed pure and good. So now, most of the time, even though, like, in my real life, I look at the ideologies of the Empire and I'm like, of course that's terrible. Of course I wouldn't, like, in my real life, I would never support something like that because it's clearly terrible. But it's just so much fun to poke Ross.
Okay, Jess, I want you to save that clip. Because we had talked about doing a Rebels versus Empire debate.
And I'm going to debate you to the ground, my friend.
Not anymore after that clip.
And that's the thing, though, is this is another thing that these kind of characters do. When you have them as the villains, so when you have the archetypal, they're evil, they're dastardly, that's fine, that's fun. It's fun to punch Nazis, is basically the idea. But the thing is, real life bad guys, quote unquote, are rarely outright villainous. They're rarely that. And in a sense,
you don't have a Hitler coming along every other weekend.
And so it trains people it kind of trains some people to accept the notion that if someone isn't that, they're not really the bad guy. I think that's part of what causes a lot of people to sign up with the wrong side, is this notion that it's like, well, obviously this isn't the bad guy. Do you see a curly mustache for them to twirl? Come on.
He doesn't even have a goatee!
Which is obviously an exaggeration, but yeah, like there's... So I think that there are repercussions in real life, the way people treat it. Another thing that I think happens is you get... because the vast majority of our Hollywood movies and such have been made by a certain subset of the population, the generally reasonably wealthy white male straight population, you get a focus on certain values that most of us are aware that there are other values that are good. Like that just because we like to elevate the really macho man type doesn't mean that we don't value other things. But a lot of people kind of learn from media what they're supposed to value.
Yeah.
And therefore they stop valuing things that are of worth in other places. And that can be a problem with this. And then, of course, you get competitive idealization as a side effect of this. Because people are used to those type of protagonists, if you have one that's more complex or that has flaws, they'll just gloss over them.
Yeah.
So I've got examples of all of these in Star Wars, of the way this shows up.
I'm excited for this.
So we got Han Solo is the one I wanted to talk about with him. Is you have the original Han Solo versus what he's evolved into over time. The original Han Solo was very much So
when you say original Han Solo, we're saying Episode 4 Han Solo.
Episode 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, 4, 5, and 6.
The original trilogy Han Solo. Han was very much... Movie Bob has another video about this that I really enjoyed, where Han was another audience insert character, but he was the opposite sort from Luke. Not in just that he's not as forthrightly moral, but in that Luke is the idealized, we get to set ourselves up as the hero, and Han is the actual dude out of 1970s America going,
oh, come on.
Isn't this all a little ridiculous?
Yeah.
Like, really, it's like, I've been from one end of the galaxy to the other, but I've never seen anything that would make me believe that there's some all-powerful force holding things together.
Luke is what we were supposed to shoot for and strive for, and Han is what we
More
are.
what we are. He's a grounding for the audience.
Okay.
He allows the audience to see someone, like, it's something he pointed out in this video, is that throughout the original trilogy, you've got all these grandiose characters. You've got Obi-Wan that's this mystical wizard. You've got Yoda that's this wise old, you've got Leia that is this powerful leading princess and everything. And then you've got Luke, you've got Han that is really just some dude. And he actually he went through like 6 shots of different movies from the 70s, like Dirty Harry and all these others, where he's like, in any other movies made during the 70s, Han Solo would have been the protagonist. But here he's not. Here he's just there so that all of us who are having a little trouble getting into this can go, oh, okay, good. Yeah, someone else is saying that this is a little over the top. All right, I feel more comfortable now. He's a grounding character. And in a certain sense, he's a little bit of wish fulfillment for the people who don't necessarily want to be that idealized character. He's the for people like me who are like,
for the Chris's and the Kylers of the world.
Well, yeah, those of us who delude ourselves that we are actually some sort of bad boy, some sort of scruffy-looking scoundrel. Yes, exactly. It's like we for whom being a scoundrel is the wish fulfillment. That it's like, yeah, I'm that cool. I could do that. And it's like, I always think of when we used to play, they had the game of houses on that Wheel of Time fan website.
Oh yeah.
So they basically played Mafia on this website, and they'd have runs
Those
where
were the
they
days.
did. And we had
the early days of the internet.
We had this time where we played this, where we were like, yeah, we're gonna control this game. We're gonna be the ones that are calling the shots. We're gonna be calling who gets voted out and what happens and everything. And we were all gung ho. We were like making alliances with people on this website.
We did the first game.
No, and then we got after we set this up as this big thing. First round, we both got voted out.
Yep.
They kicked us out of their game. And for me, it was very much this eye-opening moment.
And kicked us out of the game, not like we don't want to play with you guys,
yeah,
but
just
we were voted out to be killed
we were playing
or
Mafia,
whatever.
so we were the first ones killed. We were the first ones gone. It was this moment for me where it was very much an eye-opening. As much as I'd like to believe that if I were in the Wheel of Time or something, or one of these, I'd be that canny manipulator that's behind the scenes doing all this stuff.
But realistically, you'd probably be the guy who gets killed at the
exactly.
farmhouse in the first chapter.
It was a gut punch of a wake up, but it was this wake up of, I'm not as awesome as I like to daydream I am.
Yep.
That stuff is all a lot harder than these movies make it look.
Chris, you are to us.
Thank you. I
It makes you feel any better, Chris. I think you're the most manipulative guy on the show.
I know, thank you. I do feel reassured that most of my friends think, so we once played the what if game or whatever, and see pulling out cards, and it's like, who in the group is this or that, and it's like, who in the group would you be most upset, would you least like to run into in a dark alley? And everyone was just Chris, and I was like, oh, thanks guys.
You're really just saying that to make me feel better.
I know I'm not scary, but I really appreciate you all making me feel that way. That's nice of you.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, but so original Han, one of the big things that sets him apart from most of the wish fulfillment characters is that he is not excessively competent. Han is constantly blundering from one mistake to another throughout the entire, and he still makes it work. He's
ticking his ship to make it turn on right.
Yeah, and he's sneaking up on a dude and then stepping on a stick and ended up in a fist fight instead of the quick
stealth takedown
that he wanted. And he does that throughout the series. He is the most normal person on screen at any given point. Everything constantly blows in his face, and he's just barely lucky enough that he gets through it anyway. And you contrast that with what he's become over time. Look at Han Solo in Solo: A Star Wars Story, where he is amazing at sabacc. He always talked about what a good pilot he was, but it always kind of came across as a bit of bravado.
Yeah.
Whereas in this Han is legitimately the pilot that we're always told that Han always claimed he was. And we do get some of the, say we see he's exaggerating his Kessel Run and everything, and that's nice. But there are some remnants of what he used to be. Even in Force Awakens, though, you have that point where he shoots a stormtrooper without even looking.
That's
and that
what I
always
first
bothered
thought
me,
of.
because I was like, that's not who Han is. He's not supernaturally capable. That's the point. But he's become that over time as more and more of a wish fulfillment for the people who want their to be the scoundrel. And that's very visible. So it's interesting to me to see him evolve from being the most relatable, normal person on screen into what Luke was from the very beginning, And again, not bad per se, but for me, I don't like the shift in Han. I liked him better as the blundering, constantly making mistakes.
Well, they still try to do that a little bit.
There's some of it, yeah. I'm not saying they botched it completely. But
yeah, the one blaster
drastic.
shot is, yeah.
But yeah, there are definitely, if you compare Han Solo Star Wars Story to the original trilogy Han Solo, there's definitely a shift towards the more awesome,
Yeah, definitely.
So then Leia Organa. What I wanted to talk about with Leia was what we talked about with Hermione and Leia. I already went into this in our last episode, so don't need to go into it much here. But just this attitude of what's fascinating to me about both Hermione and Leia is that they were both really well written characters. Like Leia wasn't the protagonist character, which I delved into last time. She wasn't solving problems and everything, but she was, as a person, as a crafted character, she wasn't a very engaging person. She was fiery. She was not just some bland good person, but neither was she an awful bee. She was just kind of she bounced back and forth between. She was realistic in that sense.
Yeah.
Hermione in the books, she's very capable, but she also has some distinct flaws. She messes up. She makes mistakes. She is abrasive personality-wise. Like she's a real person in that sense. But what's fascinating to me is that both of these characters are undergoing this transition over time. Hermione first with the fandom and then with the transition to the movies, where they get their flaws, or at least what people perceive as flaws, stripped away and get elevated to higher status so that people can wish fulfill with them the way that they wish. It's almost because Leia isn't filling the narrative role that Luke has, and so we're going to craft a mental version of her that is anyway, so that we can do the same thing that they're doing over there, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. For me, it just points to the need to make more female protagonists that people can do that in a healthy way, as opposed to
in a more natural way.
Well, and in a healthy way where it's like both Hermione and Leia have the traces that guy highlighted in that article of, oh, everyone around me is incompetent, so I have to do everything myself. That they're toxic people. And so we're in order to elevate them to this status where we're doing that, we're actually making them into worse role models instead of being this ideal that we can strive to.
Ross nods in agreement.
Yep, which I've been doing several times throughout the episode.
It's interesting. It's interesting to see how that gets done. It's
Tyler is less confused.
Competitive idealization at work, turning this into a competition where we have to make her the most awesome, or she has to she's playing down the people around her, or at least the people making the movies are, in order to make her seem better. Poe Dameron and FN2187, idealization versus the text. So we have this instinctive, this learned instinct to elevate the characters even as we're watching it. So in Last Jedi, you get a lot of people who are really upset about Poe being talked down to, that Poe's being dismissed, and it's like, why? We've had 10 minutes. It's like take all of his stuff out of Force Awakens and what happened before this in this movie. We've got like 20 minutes maybe of Poe, and yet we're elevating him into this. Of course he's right. Of course, a lot of people at least are, where they're just like, they're upset. Part of the reason they're upset with Holdo is because she's dismissing this man who shouldn't be dismissed, and it's like, why shouldn't he? Like, you're idealizing him even in the moment where we know he's an awesome pilot.
And of course, I just want to side with Poe Dameron because Oscar Isaac is so sexy.
Yeah,
so, that's... I'm Team Poe. Ride or die.
Well, and he learns it. Like, yeah, that's... But yeah, it's this instinctive thing that people are doing as they're watching it, where they're going, no, he can't be wrong, he's the protagonist, and we're idealizing him in the moment.
Yeah. Same
thing happens with Finn at the end, where he's going on the suicide run. These movies have taught us that if a character is making a suicide run, it is going to be successful. It's going to be the Independence Day final. It's going to be
sacrifice
awesome.
That is needed to
and
achieve
so
success.
Despite the fact that this movie is telling us left and right that no, this won't work, we're instinctively going, yes, of course it will, and how dare you stop him? Like, that's not how this is supposed to go.
I think I've made that exact argument.
Well, and it was my instinct as I was watching it. Like, I was watching it and I was going, wait, Poe's pulling them off now? Why, though? Like, they're getting close. They're going to blow it up because that's what they're supposed to do. And then it's like, oh, he's going to make a suicide run. No, I don't want Finn to die. And then Rose stopped him and I was like, wait, what? Why? And the further I've gotten from that initial moment, the more I've gone, no, I like what this is doing. Like, I can see what they're going after, but in that moment, I was right where most of the audience was, idealizing what Finn was doing, idealizing him himself, and pushing towards, yeah, it's going to be the heroic sacrifice, and it's going to hurt, but it's going to hurt so good. And instead, it got undercut in a really drastic way. And then Finn, in general, you get this, I don't see a whole lot of this, but I have seen some of it, where you get this kind of, a bit of backlash against him, because people don't feel like he's as awesome as he should be. Where he's very much a more regular guy. Like, he's a stormtrooper that we've got all this backstory for him in the comics and in the books and stuff, explaining that he's this elite stormtrooper who is, who's got all this training. He was one of the handpicked by Phasma to be the very best of the best, which is why everyone takes it so personally when he goes traitor. But we don't see that on screen. Like, on screen, he's a bit more bumbling.
Wait, people say that he was this elite trained best of the best.
That's his backstory. That's his actual backstory in canon. I read this up on Wikipedia.
And I believe that's also the argument that you made when we were talking about it, because I was making the bumbling.
Yeah, well, on screen, he does end up being somewhat more bumbling, somewhat more average, which I love. But there's a lot of people who want to competitively idealize him, who get upset that he's not being as awesome as he should be. One thing I read when I was preparing for this episode was talking about how much it bothered them that Rey beat Kylo Ren after Finn couldn't do it because Finn was this elite stormtrooper and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, he doesn't even have the Force.
Yeah.
Come on. You're negging on him for not beating on both of them because of this.
Which is just silly, because as soon as he picked up the lightsaber, I'm like, cool, so you're headed for a butt whooping. Like,
I was just told that. I was
immediately.
Like, I get to see someone who doesn't have the Force use a lightsaber? I never knew I wanted to see that, but now I do.
And it went about like I thought it would.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, honestly,
swing,
I think it went a little better.
Okay, you're done.
I think Finn did a little better than I would have expected.
I think that's just because Kylo was like, I'm not even going to put effort into you because you're not worth it.
But where it's like, Finn doesn't get to say most of the cool things. You know? He gets the let's go Chrome Dome. Mm-hmm. Which I love. I feel it's very consistent with his character. He's awkward. He has had no real socializing. In his life. He's raised by this evil empire as a child soldier. It's a wonder he gets along with people as well as he does. Frankly, that's the ridiculous part about Finn.
That's the most... Save it for our Star Wars Improbabilities show.
But you get this backlash for people who want Finn to be the cool, stock, awesome character. Like, they want him to be his character from Pacific Rim 2, or Idris Elba's character from Pacific Rim 1, where they're just awesome and gritty and cool, and that's that. And it's that competitive idealization at work. So then Rose I feel like some of what is kind of an example of a bit of the dismissive of other, like, I feel like Rose is a really good person. But what causes her to get dismissed by some people, and I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but is that the values she is showing on screens are not ones that we're used to idealizing in movies.
Yeah.
You know, that she, you know, we are introduced to her when she is crying in a corner by herself, and then she immediately goes and stops the hero from doing what he's trying to do, and is very negative on him.
Yeah,
very angry at him.
Yes, she is.
And then throughout the rest of the movie, she's very much in this position of this average person who's in this world going, yeah, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world, like, that people don't want to see. And she's basically dissuading Finn from being Han Solo, is what she's doing. Like, Finn, you've got DJ that's kind of pulling him into this, yeah, don't sign up, be more of the cool guy, be more of the, don't just be a hero. And she's saying, no, come be Luke, you know, don't even be what Han was. Just come be unreservedly on this side. Be really gung-ho about this instead of being yeah, I'm here to help, but we'll see. Whatever. And so, which I feel like for a lot of people comes across as kind of negative. This, like, she's basically telling Finn, don't be Han Solo. Be better than Han Solo. But, I mean, really, in real life, don't we all want to be a little better than Han Solo is as a person? Like,
yeah,
that's probably better. That's, you know, and it's she's basically occupying this uncomfortable... The uncomfortable situation of your wet blanket friend that you know is right, that you know is telling you to be smarter, to be better, to be good, to not go out and do that stupid thing that all the other teenagers are going to do. That's who Rose is, in a lot of ways. And that's a really good person to have around. That's a person who really deserves to be elevated. You know, the voice of reason who's going to be like, well, I know everyone else is lighting those firecrackers in their bare hands, but you really should not do that. Or that person that's going, I know that you're tired of being lectured about this, but really, you shouldn't be getting involved with those people. I know they're nice people. I know they've got many good qualities, but...
I know the First Order has snazzy uniforms, Kyler, but you should really stay away.
But yeah, she gets to be the wet blanket lecturer. And nobody likes that person. Except we all have friends that are like that we're like, yeah, we do like that. I think of Brad Chandler. Mm-hmm. Brad Chandler was often, for me, the person who was going, stop being an idiot. You know, and he was always politer than that. But the one who was going, I don't think we should do that. And I'd be like, I know he's right, but why does he always have to be a stick in the mud? And I don't think you're a stick in the mud, Brad. I know you're not listening to this, but that's the thing, is it was something I had to learn to value over time. And, you know, we all know those people but that's what Rose gets to be. And so, but I feel like part of the negativity towards Rose is she's the one stepping in on all our fun to go, okay, but really though, we can be better. Like, shouldn't we all be better, guys? And everyone going, ugh, no, we're just having fun. Stop telling us to be better. It's not what we're here for. And so it's this kind of, it's a different value than we usually get glorified, stepping in and getting glorified. And it angers and frustrates a lot of people because that's not what they want glorified. Even though most of us can look at Rose and go, well, yeah, she's right. Like, mm-hmm. But it's not as fun. Oh, and then I put these on here just because I found them curious. Jin and Chirrut, where this weird lack of competitive idealization that happens with them. Even though,
really?
Yeah, in the sense that, so you've got a lot of people upset about Rey as, you know, eclipsing Luke in some way because she's doing cooler stuff or bigger stuff or whatever. And I feel like there's similar things, though. It's like Chirrut is, for me, as unlikely as anything Rey and Luke is doing. Like, this is a man who apparently, like, is somewhat Force sensitive, but wasn't part of the Jedi Order. Mm-hmm. He was part of the Guardians of the Whills. Like, in Wheel of Time terminology, he's basically the person who wasn't strong enough in the One Power to actually make it into the White Tower, but got trained briefly so that they wouldn't be a danger to the people around them or something. Like,
right.
Yeah. You're not strong enough to be one of the heroes, and yet he's doing literally everything the heroes do, and in some cases doing it more impressive than anyone else we've seen doing it, and yet nobody's going, oh, he can't do that. He can't be more awesome than Luke Skywalker. And I found that very intriguing. I'm like, why and even just like not even getting into any potential sexism thing. Like Jin is more awesome than she has a right to be. You know, she's a apparently a thief or criminal or whatever, and you have that scene where she's fighting in Jeddah where it's like even Cassian stops to stare because she is literally unexpectedly and absurdly good at this. And nobody's bothered by that. Like, nobody, I've never heard anyone other than me complaining about that particular thing. That's my own pet peeve. And I think part of it is that they're not set up directly next to Luke the way that Rey is. Yeah, and so it doesn't encourage that competitive idealization.
But to me, that does weaken the sexism argument for Rey, because if it was truly about sexism, they would be complaining about Jyn, and we don't see that as much.
Here's the difference between Jyn and Rey, though. Jyn, for all that she's the protagonist, is basically off. She's not doing anything to solve anything. She gets pulled along through the plot by everyone else.
But to be fair, people that are actually sexist and making those arguments probably are also not smart enough to make this realization that she's not actually doing anything.
But it's kind of an instinctive thing. It's like they're not threatened, but most of these fanboys that are threatened by Rey aren't threatened by Leia. They love Leia. Mm-hmm. And I pointed out in our last episode how that guy's version of Leia that he was describing was not what Leia was on screen. It was this idealized version that was conveniently idealized in a way that didn't make her a threat to any of his fantasies of male empowerment. And Jyn is kind of a similar thing where she's not a threat to anyone. She's not so cool. She's not cooler than Cassian. She's not eclipsing any of our long-standing characters that were so cool. She's not really doing anything. And so I feel like for a lot of guys, there's this instinctive like, oh yeah, she's not only not being put on the same level, but she's also not really doing anything. Period. So I'm okay. And that's referring specifically to people who are sexist, and so therefore, the people that would be threatened by her because it's a woman doing that, or because it's someone else other than me doing that. And I feel like why some of them don't, because there is sexist backlash against Jyn. There was from the very beginning. It's just not nearly.
I didn't see it.
It's not nearly as vocal.
Yeah.
And you do have to go look for it.
Yeah.
But it did happen. It's just far muted, and I think part of it is it's just that they're not being put in direct competition. But
and I think that probably stokes the fire a bit. Yeah. The fact that she is directly being compared to Luke.
But it's like, again, I'm not laying this at the foot of sexism, because for the most part, she is a woman and people aren't upset by her. Trude is a man; they're not upset by him. I feel like you definitely could write it. Wesley Crusher was annoying, and he was
shut up, Wesley.
It wasn't about sex. Wesley was not annoying because of sexism. He's just not well written. It was just an interesting contrast to me, where I'm like, these ones aren't earning that ire, and I feel like it's just because nobody perceives them as a threat because they're isolated in their own little story.
Yeah.
And so you don't get that competitive idealization like you would. Now, if we ever get another Guardian of the Wills who is doing amazing things with the Force, then you'll probably get some people getting really upset because he's more awesome than Chirrut, or doing things Chirrut should have been able to do. I would see that happening.
Yeah, I could see that too. I'd also be down with that, though. More Guardians of the Wills. More like extracurricular, like extra Jedi organizations, Like, I'd be super cool.
Yeah, it's an avenue I hope to explore. Yeah, definitely. Maybe in books. Maybe
I was going to have some cool, like, tie-up to wrap all this up, and then I just sort of petered out on my notes and went, nope, guess I'm done. So.
But, well, thank you, Chris. I
thank you.
I think that was a really good discussion.
Thank you all for letting me, for giving me a place to rant about the things that I like. I had them move this up in the production schedule because I get these topics in my head, and I'll be like shelving books at the library, just going, oh yeah, and then this, and this. And if I reach a point where I'm like, all right, I got to get this out of my head. Yep. We got to move this episode up in the production line because I got to get this done.
Hey, and they're always good though. I mean, and hopefully you guys feel this way too, that it's really fun to delve into one of our specialties and get kind of a deep dive from that perspective, So thank you, Chris. That was really cool, and gave me some interesting things to think about with my own feelings towards Star Wars. So
thank you.
As always, we would love for you to follow us on Twitter and say nice things or bad things, just anything really. I'll take it. On Twitter at More Civilized, and then you can also join our Facebook group, More Civilized Podcast. Lindsay is currently ranting about our Star Wars Heroes bracket, and
as she should.
And the memes keep rolling in, which I appreciate. They're pretty good. Mm-hmm. So get in there. We would love to have you guys in there so we can interact with you guys. We love any interaction we can have with you guys. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so speaking of the interaction we are having, this week's shout-out goes to Kyle McPherson, if I'm saying that right, who posted the Order 66 meme where Anakin's face is superimposed over the pirate in the opening of SpongeBob SquarePants.
Are you ready, kids?
Yeah. And so the caption reads, when Anakin enters the Jedi Temple during Order 66, and it's, are you ready, kids? Well, but it goes on, which is why this is my shout out for today. It's a conversation back and forth between our friend Caleb and Kyler, who have modified the words for the opening title. Caleb responds, I can't hear you. Kyler comes back, murder younglings. Obsessive, annoying, and whiny as he murder younglings, right? Caleb comes back with, and I'm not familiar enough with SpongeBob to keep going with the song, I'm sorry, but he says, if killing young Force users is what you seek, murder younglings, then come to the Jedi Temple for a full peek. Caleb goes on, ready, murder younglings, lightsaber whiff noises instead of flute solo to end the scene. So, thank you all. I absolutely was rolling on the ground reading through that. So
that was pretty funny.
Well done, everyone. Also, you can speak with me on Twitter if you so choose, at Mr_R_star.
If there's any topics that you would like to hear us discuss, please let us know on Facebook or Twitter. Give us some ideas. We're always happy to pander, as I like to say.
And on that note, Lindsay, we're getting there. Just calm down. Lindsay was harassing me because we didn't do her idea like the next week.
Yeah.
So we're getting there. We're getting there,
Lindsay.
It's
on the list.
Got a schedule, all right?
There's a list. Believe me, it's a list.
I had to get this out of my head. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Finally be able to rest peacefully tonight.
There you go. First night in weeks, Chris has got a decent sleep.
Yeah. My kids will wake up all night now.
Yeah, for real.
Just to keep balance in the Force.
Oh, shoot.
But thank you for listening, and may the Force be with you all.
Always.
I'm Anna Graves, and thank you for listening to a more civilized podcast.
Did you sniff the pop filter a second ago?
Yes, you did.
Because, you leaned real close, and I thought I heard a smell, but I wasn't sure.
I thought you were about to whisper something.
Ain't nothing says class like rhinestones.
Fly a fighter pilot. Even does not mean you.
We can throw this in at the end, but sometimes I go back and listen to the episodes, and one of you will say something, and I'll have something pop into my head. I'm like, that would be funny, and then I'll say it on the show, and I'm like, oh, I'm a genius.